Okay, I'll call to order the Wednesday, November 19th, 2025 meeting of the Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Doug Neely. Here. Commissioner Scott Wilson.
Here.
Commissioner Lori Arenello.
Here.
Commissioner Adam Morrow is excused tonight. And Chair Mike Mitchell.
Here. Thank you. Okay, number 2 on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any public comment? No? Okay, nobody online? Okay. We'll move on to item number 3A, which is Clackamette Cove Water Quality Analysis Phase 2 update. Mr. Conkle, is that you to start?
I think it's Mr. Green.
No, it's a
Public Works
it's a whole
Director,
game.
yeah.
Okay. Everybody can introduce themselves, please. Thank you.
Good evening, Urban Renewal Commission Chair and Commissioners, Dana Webb, Public Works Director, and I'm going to hand it off to Marcos.
Hello, I'm Marcos Kubo, Water Quality Coordinator of Oregon City Public Works. Here introducing Mark Rosenkrantz from Aquatic Insights and Zoe Rodriguez from I'm blanking on the Near Water. There we go, Near Water Consulting, and they've been working very hard to understand the water quality issues in the Cove, and they've got a lovely presentation that discusses all the hard work that they've done thus far.
There we go. Thank you, Marcus. Mark Rosenkrantz from Aquatic Insight, and we've had the pleasure of working on the Cove for the last couple of years. It's been really an enjoyable project. So today we're going to cover what we've done the last couple of years and what we've learned, and talk a little bit about steps moving forward. Let's see. Nope. Yeah, there we go. So like I said, we're going to share about what we learned about the Cove, the water levels and hydrodynamics of the Cove between the water, between the river, the Willamette River, the Clackamette River, and the Cove. And then the other component talking about water quality, and then next steps, and we'll have a little bit of time on the end for some questions. I've got to realize that when I click this, it doesn't change this. So there we go. Phase 2 focus and scope was advance our understanding of the Cove hydrodynamics, water quality, and the management options. Develop and evaluate alternatives using the CQUAL W2 model. Support the city's decision-making through workshops and technical documentation. And the scope, project management, well, you can see the scope. I don't really need to read it to you. But these are the tasks that we went through over this last year. You know, basically modeling the conditions in the river and how they affect the Cove, and then collecting water quality data, which is going to lead to an alternatives evaluation at the end of the project for options for improving the Cove. So since, oops. Wow, what am I doing here? Pardon me. Okay, progress since our Phase 2 kickoff meeting, we sent draft reports for comments for the Phase 1 water quality report, the water quality monitoring plan, and the potential for pollutant mitigation through the groundwater pathways. And that's related to the legacy landfill that's adjacent to Cove. And we began monitoring this summer in July. We had a vegetation survey in August, and some bathymetric surveys kind of validating the sediment depth in the Cove. That was on August 12th. And then we had a geomorphologist looking at the little gravel bar out there to advise on that. That was in August as well. And so kind of an overview of our monitoring activities. So as you can see, pardon me that it's a little bit small, but so we're measuring water levels at various locations around the cove and in the river. So we're measuring downstream of the cove underneath the Highway 99 bridge. We have a logger at the pilings by the old sheriff's boathouse. And then we have another one upstream that we just installed this summer. And then we're also monitoring the levels of the Willamette River gauge downstream that's just down from the falls. Then we have water quality data collection sites. So the primary sites are A and C. So A is the deepest part of the cove, and we're collecting SON profiles to measure oxygen and temperature and pH, conductivity and chlorophyll. We collect nutrient samples from that location. We collect phytoplankton samples to look at our species and the cell counts. And we also collected sediment cores in 3 locations to see what the nutrient concentration is in the sediments in the cove and how that would be affecting water quality. So let's talk a little bit about water levels. This is really an interesting system here because on the upstream side you have the Clackamette River coming in. The downstream side, you have the Willamette River and tidal fluctuations. And at certain times of the year, those tidal fluctuations come all the way up into the cove. And so we spent a lot of time trying to calibrate a model that is characterizing these different flows and how the tidal influence and the Clackamette River and the Cove all go together. We've been able to pretty well characterize the river and the Cove elevations, but then when you add the Willamette River tidal fluctuations in there, it becomes really, really difficult. The one thing we've kind of observed is the tidal fluctuation doesn't enter the Cove until the water level at the entrance is over 12 feet because there's a gravel bar that that isolates the cove from the summer water level, the lower summer water levels below 12 feet. There's a gravel bar that kind of serves as a dam for the cove, and it prevents tidal fluctuations from making it all the way into the cove. So, but when the water levels during the winter, when the river's running higher and the water level is over 12 feet, then you do start to see some tidal fluctuations there. So it's really interesting looking at this data and how it all kind of plays together.
Mark, let me add something. So there's actually 2 elevations, one that are controlling the system and almost like 2 different hydraulic checks. One is the upper part of the gravel bar. When the river drops low enough, all of the flows are going to go through the north channel, which Mark will show in subsequent slides, and that's controlled by one level. And at that point, water stops going into the cove. And then you have this other level on the lower end, and also related to the water levels below the cove, where once they're low enough, that tidal fluctuation doesn't make it in. So you've got the 2 dynamics, one about water entering from the upper part of the cove, and the other one, the tidal fluctuation. When the river is high enough, you're getting both things. You're seeing water levels go up by quite a lot, as well as seeing those diurnal fluctuations, which are from the Willamette River.
Could I make a request that you go to the last slide? I presume that solid green line, does that, anything above that indicate where the water's coming in?
Yeah, so that solid green line is the
think the time period here is important.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I can see what it is. I was more interested in the bars there. I presume that indicates the tidal aspects. Is that right?
Yeah, so the top line is so that's that's the river upstream, and then you've got the cove. Excuse me, the cove is the next line down, the green one, and then those orange lines and the blue lines, those are the right, yeah, the Willamette River, and then the blue one is the gauge underneath the Highway 99 bridge. So the orange one is the Willamette River. We have a longer data set for that, and then the blue one is the one underneath the Clackamette River. So you can see that those kind of are pretty well married together, but it just doesn't make it all the way up into the cove on the green line there, except for certain times of the year when the river is really high.
That was what I thought. Okay.
Okay.
And the picture you have with the arrow on the next slide, that's the gravel?
Yeah, so that shows, the arrow shows the downstream side, that gravel bar that you're looking at. Like if you're standing and looking down at that arrow, you can see how the gravel bar just kind of comes up and then it dives down into the Clackamas River there. So
And that's the blue that we can see in the background.
Yes, right, correct. Yeah, you're looking underneath the Highway 99 bridge. So, and as Zoe was saying that, I think the next slide maybe shows this a little bit better. Let's see. Yeah, so we'll go to the next slide. And we can see that, like Zoe was saying, the majority of the flow is confined to the north channel, the gravel bar, particularly during the summer. And there's very little flow coming into the cove from the upstream side. And there's also, I was a kid too, and I used to do this. There's kids that, they build dams in there and all kinds of fun stuff to manipulate that. So that, kind of impedes a little bit of the flow coming in too. And then, as we discussed, the gravel bar down below kind of acts as the hydraulic control for water leaving the cove. So it kind of runs into that gravel bar and just kind of seeps through, but doesn't flow over.
Looks more like a gravel island instead of a gravel bar.
Yeah, that's true. So that's kind of the flow situation that we're working on. And again, it's the purpose of all of this effort in trying to find out or trying to calibrate our model is because of the scenarios that we want to develop later on is what is the best way to improve water quality in the cove. And if one of the options is to improve flow, then we have to be able to understand the conditions now to be able to plug future conditions into the model and have it be accurate, to be able to accurately describe what the options are and how they would affect the cove. So that's why it's taking a bit of effort to make sure that we're getting that right. And so we're going to move on to the water quality component of our study. And this is just really, the takeaway from this is to understand that during the summer, the cove is really acting like a lake in that it becomes thermally stratified. So if you look at the top chart there, that red, the red line is the temperature as you're going from the surface down to the bottom of the cove. And it exemplifies a typical lake situation where it's warmer on top, cooler on the bottom. And the result of that is, if you look at that same chart, you can see the oxygen profile. The oxygen declines pretty dramatically from the surface to the bottom. And the result of that is phosphorus is released from the sediment under those conditions, under those no oxygen conditions. So
The oxygen is the blue line?
Oxygen is the blue line, yes, correct. So the temperature is the red line, oxygen is the blue line, and the green line is chlorophyll. And so as you're lowering it down, you can also see that chlorophyll represents the amount of algae in the water column. And so they're really, and the times that I've spent on the Cove, there wasn't really that much algae on the surface. It was mostly down below, and you can see that in this profile where the green line goes quite a ways to the right, and that's reflecting high chlorophyll down at the depth as a result of a certain species of algae that's in there. So, and so the vertical profiles, they demonstrate the stratification and how it acts like a lake during the summer. And then as the summer progresses, the stratification strengthens and oxygen is depleted, and then promoting the internal phosphorus release. And the dashed lines versus the solid lines, they just show the condition last year. Those are the dashed lines at approximately the same date, and the conditions this year. So they're very similar. They just change a little bit slightly. Like this year, the water temperature was warmer than last year. Chlorophyll was a little bit different depth, but they follow along pretty closely from year to year. And so how does the Cove temperature compare to the river temperature? And your top chart there, and this is kind of important because when you have water coming into the Cove from the river, is it warmer or is it colder than what the temperature of the water in the Cove is? Because in the bottom chart, you can see down there, the red line is the temperature of the Cove at 1 meter, and then which is essentially near the surface, and then the 6 meter, which is near the bottom, is the blue line, and then the dashed blue line is the river. So you can see during the early part of the year, the river and the Cove are about the same temperature, and then starting in August or so, the Cove starts to cool off. So this was kind of something that we were interested in looking at, is like, okay, if there's any water coming into the Cove, where is it going? Is it going to the bottom of the Cove? Is it staying at the top? Or how is it affecting the water quality in the Cove? So, so essentially I guess there's really nothing else I can say on that.
Well, I'm going to have you say it again. The red line represents what?
Yeah, the red line represents the Cove near the surface, the water temperature of the Cove near the surface.
Okay.
The blue line is the water temperature of the Cove near the bottom. And then the dashed blue line is the temperature of the water in the river. And this is a time series. It's from May to December. Yeah.
Sorry, before we move on, can you go back one more slide? Yes,
Yeah.
This one. So I want to make sure my understanding is the green line at the bottom chart is saying that the chlorophyll is about 3 meters deep and it becomes concentrated at that level during the summer?
That's correct. The particular species of algae, there's a cyanobacteria and other algal species that are predominantly at this depth. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is cyanobacteria, they have the ability to adjust their buoyancy, and so they can settle at a depth that is optimum for their growth. Mm-hmm. And the Cove is relatively clear. The water clarity was relatively high, and so these cyanobacteria can settle lower in the water column, still get enough still get enough sunlight, but they're closer to the nutrients that are coming up from the sediment. So they hang down at a depth that's kind of optimal for their growth.
And so what makes this algae bloom harmful? Is it because it's just in the water and a certain parts per million becomes harmful? Or is it needs to be ingested or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, algae isn't necessarily harmful, right? And if you have a high concentration of, this isn't just cyanobacteria down here, this is other algal species. But if they're down 3 meters down in the water column, you're not really ever going to interact with them.
Yeah.
It's only when they're floating at the surface, on those surface films, that you really have to be concerned. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation about the significance of surface accumulations. But in answer to your broader question, it's if you have a surface accumulation or a surface film, then the concentration of the algal cells in that surface film and the concentration of, like if it's producing toxins, then the concentration of the toxins, those are the things that you need to be aware of. But there hasn't been a surface accumulation of cyanobacteria in the Cove in the last 2 years that we've been in there. So there's been accumulation of other things, but just not cyanobacteria. Any other questions on this slide before we move on? Okay. And so this is just kind of a brief, these are the sediment cores that we collected from the Cove. We collected them from 2 different sites. One was the deepest part of the Cove, and then Site B is another site farther east to characterize if that is much different. So really, to take away from this is showing when you take these sediment cores, you take a column of sediment out of the bottom of the lake, and then you slice that off in 1 centimeter increments in this case, and then you have each one of those depths analyzed for nutrient concentration. And what this chart is showing how much phosphorus is bound in iron, how much of it is organic phosphorus, how much of it is bound up and not available. And so the important thing to look at is the orange and the green, because those are the iron-bound and the organic phosphorus components that become available during summer stratification periods when the Cove, when it's anoxic at the sediment. So that's a really high percentage of the phosphorus that's in this Cove. And so you have quite a bit of internal phosphorus being released from the sediment. So that's kind of the takeaway from this. And there are steps that you can take to mitigate for this.
So I want to make sure I understood what you said. You're saying that these phosphorus levels compared to the average lake, these are much higher than normal? So it's a much greater source of nutrients?
The overall concentration isn't dramatically higher, but the percentage of phosphorus that's available is pretty high. So what that means is there's a lot more phosphorus down there that is either iron-bound or in organic form that is available and can be released to the water column.
Okay, thank you.
And so this shows our phosphorus, the results of our phosphorus data collection. And I really wish I had a pointer that I could use on this, but the orange lines are, and the top chart is data that was collected at 2 meters depth, and the bottom chart is data that was collected at 6 meters, so near the surface and near the bottom. And the orange line is last year, and the blue line is this year. And kind of the takeaway from this is again, in the latter part of the summer, you're starting to see more phosphorus at these levels than you did earlier on in the summer, meaning the phosphorus, and again, these are the periods when the cove is isolated from the river, and so it's acting more like a lake, and so you're starting to see phosphorus, an increase of phosphorus in the water as the summer goes on, meaning it's coming from the sediment and it's internally being released from the sediment up into the water column. Now, I want you to note that the scale on these two is quite a bit different. The scale is, it's 0.04 milligrams per liter on the top, and then 1.6 milligrams per liter at the top scale on the bottom one. So the phosphorus coming out of the sediment at the bottom is really, really high in this system.
You have an assistant over there who's got the hand, so if you need to have him point at something, if we don't have a pointer.
Good point. Yeah, I suppose I could even carry this over and point if I have to.
Yeah, you could.
Would that help?
If it helps you.
I don't feel. Yeah, I'll do that, I guess. So, let's see.
Can I throw in a question, because it's the one of interest probably. At what point do available phosphorus pose a problem to the biological health of the body?
Yeah, so well, kind of finishing up what I was, I'm going to go mobile here. So you can, on this, you can see that during the latter part of the summer, the phosphorus really increases down near the bottom of the cove, and then it decreases down here because you're starting to get the water at the top is starting to cool, is starting to become less stratified. The water at the top is starting to be the same temperature as the water at the bottom, so it's starting to mix again, and so you're getting oxygen down at the bottom of the cove, and so that's why you're declining. Now, the significance of the higher phosphorus, the phosphorus at the surface, it gets above 0.02 milligrams per liter. That's about our target. We would like to keep the phosphorus below 0.02 milligrams per liter so we don't have cyanobacteria blooms. And it goes above it a couple of times during, well, actually only about once during the growing season. But the significance of having high phosphorus down below is that cyanobacteria can migrate down there and access that higher phosphorus concentration and then move back up to the top of the water column where it can use sunlight. And so that's kind of what the cyanobacteria does, is it kind of moves through the water column to get nutrients from one depth, and then you then use the sunlight when it comes back to the surface. So that's and then and I guess I can finish up here. So as you can see, the phosphorus concentration does increase in October, and that's because as your lake starts to mix, all that phosphorus that was down below is then coming to the surface because it's circulating through the entire water column. And so now you're picking it up in the fall when your lake is what we call turning over and mixing all that deep water up to the surface. You're bringing the phosphorus up to the surface as well. Okay, any other questions?
Did he answer your question?
I don't know that he has. I mean, the concern of cyanobacteria, I understand, is at high levels it's problematic for other species.
That's correct. So, what the cyanobacteria does is because it can regulate its buoyancy and seek the optimal growth conditions, it outcompetes the beneficial algae, and then at certain times when it comes to the surface and accumulates at the surface in concentrations that are high enough, then it can be problematic for pets or for swimmers that happen to interact with it. Did that answer your
I've been
question?
for some aquatic life as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And it's really, and the thing about cyanobacteria too is it's not, because the healthy algae, they're small enough that the little aquatic insects can eat it, but the cyanobacteria, it forms colonies and longer chains, and the aquatic insects, they just can't eat it. And so it doesn't really have the competition that normal algal species do.
Do we happen to know if it has any natural predation? Does anything eat it?
Yeah, not really, no. There are some aquatic insects that will eat that, but only if it's the only food source available, right? They'll eat other things well before they, get into that. Let's see, I think we talked about this a little bit, the lower chart where during the summer when we were collecting, and this is kind of typical of lakes here where so the yellow lines here, those are diatoms, and those are beneficial algae. The green, that's cyanobacteria, and that's the bad stuff. And lakes typically around here, once they start to warm up and stratify, they're usually cyanobacteria dominated. And that was the case both summers during 2024 and 2025. Cyanobacteria was more prevalent this year than last year. But again, it was mostly down at 3 meters or 4 meters or so. It was a little more shallow this year than last year, and I think that's probably why you have a higher concentration here, is because when we were collecting our sample, we were just a little bit closer to the higher concentration down here. But again, at the surface, at the very surface, there wasn't, there was nothing on the surface. So it was dominated by a certain algal species, Anabaena planktonica, which it's one that lives lower in the water column, and so that's why we see it mostly down there, but not up at the surface. Okay, I think, we covered everything else there. The other thing, we did a vegetation survey, and now this is kind of an important thing to think about is, we did a survey, and the green that you see there, that is vegetation, mostly at the surface, throughout the cove. The blue is the deepest part of the cove where the vegetation didn't reach to the surface. So approximately 70% of the cove is covered with dense vegetation through most of the summer. Mostly dominated by milfoil, which is an non-native species, coontail, which is a native species, native elodea, and then there is some curlyleaf in there too, which is another non-native species. The milfoil was topped out most of the summer. And we'll look at our next slide here. And this is what a lot of the cove looked like in this picture on the right. When you look down at the cove, you saw this green film, and it was mostly this milfoil. And this is a problem because it's obviously hard to swim through, hard to boat through, doesn't look good, but also it limits, we were talking earlier about stratification and how the water at the surface gets warmer than the water down below, and it doesn't circulate. A thick carpet of aquatic vegetation really limits the circulation in a water body, and it also heats up the surface much more than it would if the plants weren't there, and it prevents the wind mixing. So that is something to keep in mind. Like people that are looking or walking along the pathway, looking down at the cove, they may see what they think is algae, but it's actually aquatic plants that are dominating the surface of the
Are these
cove.
like year-round, or they're only seasonal?
Those are seasonal, yeah. So they're mostly gone now.
Where do they
Now,
go?
I'm sorry.
Where do they go?
Well, they just die off. So
Oh, they die off, okay.
Yes, yeah. So. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, they just hitch a ride down the river and head down.
Somebody else's jurisdiction, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, so most of it dies off during the winter, but there is the curly leaf. This is kind of an interesting plant where it overwinters as a very small plant, and then that allows it to get a head start on the other vegetation. So like you'll in a system like this that has curly leaf in it, you'll see curly leaf early on, and then that'll go off and go dormant, and then you'll start to see these other things growing in there later, before they head south. All right, so we're almost done here. Thank you for your patience. So let's see. Just kind of a summary. The Cove behaves as a semi-connected system influenced by the river most of the year, but functionally isolated during the summer. The Cove dynamics are governed by the river stage and tidal exchange, alternating between connected and isolated, depending on the time of the year. The gravel bar establishes hydraulic control, limiting the exchange. The Cove water levels decline gradually through evaporation and seepage throughout the summer, just like the river is going to slowly get lower in the summer than the Cove does as well. And that leads to reduced mixing and increased residence time and warmer water. And then aquatic vegetation can significantly impact circulation. And while seasonal patterns are well characterized, the rate of inflow needed to sustain mixing will be important to evaluate. So what that means is, as we're thinking about options, like if one of the options, if we add more water to this cove to try to get it to mix a little bit throughout the summer, what is that going to need? How much water are we going to have to put in there? And where is that water going to have to come from in order to keep this cove mixed up and acting more like a river? So from a water quality standpoint, the thermal stratification dates the low oxygen conditions like we were discussing. Then the reactive sediment, that's a source of phosphorus that comes out into the water column. The vegetation traps heat and intensifies stratification. And then that's kind of a feedback loop that creates, because of it intensifies the stratification, it creates those low oxygen conditions, and just kind of creates this this feedback loop that makes it more phosphorus releasing from the sediment. So then the phosphorus buildup in the cyanobacteria, that varies from year to year, but it follows similar patterns. And then the anabaena-blanctonica, that's kind of adapted to low mixing, and because it can seek levels that are optimal for its growth form. And then, that positive feedback loop that we discussed. So the management implications and there we go. Thank you, Zoe. The management implications and pathways. So kind of the two broad options that we're looking at is we manage this thing like a lake during the summer and do the treatments that typically improve water quality in lakes, or we turn it more into a river and enhance the exchange with the Clackamette during the summer. And so those are the steps that we're moving towards right now, is what does it mean when we're managing like a cove. And once we have the modeling figured out, what is it going to mean when we're managing this thing like a river in order to enhance the exchange. And maybe there's going to be a little bit of each, depending on how the modeling and how the water quality analysis works out. So our next steps, whoops, the next steps, so we're refining the model based on our updated understanding and the various level loggers that we have in the river and the cove now, trying to really nail down that model. We're working on that now. November to December, we're going to run the model scenarios and process the outputs. January, we're going to have a workshop, a second workshop, to present our initial results of the modeling simulations. Then in April, we'll have a third workshop to present the alternatives based on the water quality and the modeling scenarios. Then April to May, the evaluation and the alternatives evaluation and technical report, and then in June, present the final alternatives and technical report. Okay, that's, hopefully I left a little bit of time for some questions.
Questions?
But,
Commissioner Neely.
You're talking about the potential of exchange between the Clackamette and the Cove. We had a person that made a presentation to John Runyon before who suggested probably taking at the upper end of the Cove water into the Cove from the Clackamette. The concern that I expressed at that time was the regulations that you take cold water from the Clackamette and down below you're returning warm water, and the Clackamette River is a major cold water refuge for migrating salmon and steelhead and lamprey, and so it might be very difficult to do some kind of a major exchange based on that if it actually warms up the temperature in the Clackamette.
That's exactly right. And so that's part of the scenario building is how that flow would affect both the temperature and the water quality of the cove. And it may not be feasible to do that. Or you might be able to do some minor manipulation of the gravel bar to introduce a little bit more water into the cove. These are all things that we're looking at, but that is a very, very significant issue about being able to do any of this. Like particularly, like you were mentioning, bringing water from the upper part of the peninsula in, that would be, that may be a bit challenging from that standpoint.
Now, you were mentioning groundwater. Mm-hmm. Are there groundwater sources available in the Cove now? And can those be increased in any way?
There's seepage through that peninsula, and I think it's not necessarily groundwater as much as the river water kind of making it through the gravel into the Cove. That's kind of the way we're initially thinking about that. And so that's something we're looking at a little bit more, but that's from the initial analysis, it's not necessarily, the ultimate source is the Clackamette River. And so it's not like groundwater that's coming from someplace else. It would be, if we enhance that, it would be reducing the flow of the Clackamette River and bringing it into the Cove and shifting it out.
Down at the lower strata, the water would be cooler anyway, probably.
I'm sorry, what?
At the lower strata where the water in the Clackamette is perhaps under the gravel and so forth, that would be cooler water.
It would be cooler than the surface water.
Yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Right.
But Mark, when the geomorphologist was out there, his very rough estimate was about 1 CFS, so it's not a huge amount coming in, and I think, we got to remember, it is coming in and you're still having these conditions in the summer where the cove gets isolated. it becomes thermally stratified. You get phosphorus release from the sediments under those low oxygen conditions. And I'm with the Near Water Resources. We're more involved in the modeling than in the water quality collection, although we see it all as being interrelated. So in approaching the modeling, we are trying to answer some key questions. And those begin with some very simple questions, such as how much water would you have to bring in to get enough mixing, how much, where, to get enough mixing to break the stratification. And that might not be an insignificant amount, with which Vice Chair Neely goes to your point of once we've looked at the feasibility and those elements such as how much water, then that still leaves on the table when we begin to analyze the alternatives, what are the regulatory challenges?
Go ahead.
Well, a couple of things. So I do know a little bit of the backstory on how this body of water got created, but I guess the questions I have is maybe you know something about this as well. That gravel bar, there's been talk over the years about let's take it away, let's keep it. Is it really deep? I mean, is there a depth to it, or is it only goes down so far? I mean, I know that's why the previous owner of it was using it for sand and gravel operations, and then the water, you know, kind of started coming in, and then there was rainwater and all of that. So there's that. And then I guess the other question maybe is not a simple answer, but is this considered to be, and I think we've tried to answer this once before, is this a body of water that's controlled by the Division of State Lands and that would have some regulation over it? Because obviously you're talking about warm water, cold water, and they get very persnickety about this sort of mixing that doesn't continue to enhance habitat or do anything for the health of the river. And the Cove, in a lot of ways, seems to me like a sort of like secondary, kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, so in answer to your first question, if I am understanding correctly, it's you're asking how deep the gravel bar is. So the gravel bar itself, I don't know how deep that is. I know that historically they used to dredge that outlet channel to allow the police boat to go through there. And based on what we have seen, the likely result of that, again, this is kind of preliminary information, is the likely result of that would be lowering the water level in the Cove, because that's right now serving as an outlet control structure. And if you lower that to allow, deep enough to allow boat traffic through, then you're going to take a couple feet of depth off of the Cove.
The gravel part.
Yeah.
Mark, do you want to, any chance, well, we don't have the slides up anymore, but I think something that we, definitely want to point out is if you look at the slide that had the water levels, and you focus on the period around April where the green line goes up and down because you're still getting that tidal influence, you're only seeing about a 1 foot difference
between the river and
the Cove, like a daily fluctuation. Now, that fluctuation could theoretically increase because you see in the blue line, which is the highway, that it's more a couple of feet. Is that enough to move the needle? That's what the model's going to answer.
Yeah. Okay.
But additionally, how much would you have to dredge relative to what was dredged to let a boat in to have those fluctuations make a difference? And if you dredge it up to a certain point, then what you could actually end up doing is lowering the water levels of the Cove in the summer, because now you're sort of preferentially allowing water to go out. And that's all of the dynamics that we are trying to capture with the model. The model's in great shape. We're getting ready next week to start running scenarios. As we get new water level data, we might make some tweaks, but it's been a really big effort because you've got to get the Clackamette River correct. And when the Clackamette River model was built, they didn't care about the bathymetry to the degree that we need to get it right, because it was for flooding purposes and other things where it could be a little bit more coarse. So we've had to change the bathymetry of the Clackamette River model part. We set up head boundary conditions mimicking the Willamette River based on the gauge below the falls. And then we were getting the water levels coming up a little bit too high. Okay, so now we've got to go to the Willamette River and figure out what the dynamics are there, where the gauge is, it's narrower, and near the Cove it opens up. So you don't exactly get the same water level. So we've had to tweak that, but we're there. In next week, we're going to start running scenarios. But again, we really want to shape those scenarios around specific questions, because one of the foundational questions is, how much water would you have to get in here to break that summer stratification? Otherwise, you're putting effort into something that's a challenge from a regulatory perspective, potentially, has cost associated with it. And so you want to make sure that any movement in that direction has a positive impact on all of the water quality issues let me back up. I don't want to call them, it's not right to call them water quality issues. It's more like those lake dynamics that form. To not get the phosphorus release, you've got to break that stratification. To break that stratification, how much circulation you need in there. So we're really thinking of this from a very kind of like, let's answer all these questions. That's why we have the workshop in January to look at those preliminary results. And then once we have those questions answered, then we can begin to refine the alternatives for the April workshop.
Go ahead, Doug.
One other thing about dredging, of course, it would be an ongoing thing. The gravels are going to continue. And I can't remember his name, but I spoke to the fisheries biologist with the state that keeps track of the nest the salmon and lamprey forms are called reds, R-E-D-D-S. And he says there are hundreds of reds in that gravel bar that's formed in that area. So it's a major spawning area for the lamprey.
Yeah.
Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about what Nick's estimation is about the reformation of the gravel bar? Or is it too early to talk about that?
I think,
okay.
well, yeah.
Very good then.
Yeah, we're just, I guess what we're working with the geomorphologist just to figure out, okay, how stable is this gravel bar? If it is dredged, what are the estimates for how long it would stay dredged, or how quickly would it fill back in? It's just a little bit too preliminary to talk about that, but that's essentially one of the things we're looking at. That's going to be important.
The aquatic plants on the surface that you talked about, is controlling those something we can and should be trying to remove separate from the water quality work?
Well, I would argue that it's not separate because they are kind of coupled together,
okay.
Right? And so in that particular milfoil that is dominant there are ways that you can treat that and pretty effective ways to be able to eliminate that. So at least the plant that is forming at the surface and forming most of those mats, I would suggest that you look into trying to treat those and remove those, because that might help the water quality. That would be beneficial to the water quality, and then other steps may not have to be so dramatic if those sort of improvements were made.
Okay, thank you.
Sense.
we are running out of time, and I see people starting to gather outside. So are any last few questions from?
I didn't get the question
Yes.
about the DSL input. I had a question,
Oh, that's right.
yeah.
Yeah, you're
I
right.
mean, it's probably a yes.
It is
probably-
water to the state, so yeah, they would
Yes.
have a say on that, absolutely.
Okay, that's what
Pardon me.
that's what I was assuming.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Sorry I missed
Commissioner
that.
Renewal?
Yes, the workshop in January, is that an internal workshop, or will the members of staff be able to attend?
Or is that
The one
with
that you're
us?
having
With
the
us.
alternatives workshop?
Yeah, so that is, what are we doing with that?
As of right now, it is an internal workshop, and then, we would, of course, defer to Marcos, Dana, if they wanted to have that be broader invite, or for us to come back here and present. That's really,
I think the intent of the
available.
workshop is really for staff, and what the next touch point, I think, with the Urban Renewal Commission will be bringing you back those alternatives so that you can provide staff feedback. So once we kind of dial those in from a technical perspective.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I'm sure there's many more, but we'll wait.
Thank you for the
Thank you, Mark and
presentation.
Zoe. Thank you, staff.
I feel smarter now than I did when I came in. So, and on a technical subject, that was a good trick. So thank you for that presentation very much. We look forward to next steps.
Well, it was a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. So we have 3 sets of minutes to approve. Does anyone have any?
I didn't find anything, and I'd like to move we approve the
Can I
minutes
finish
of
my sentence?
January 25th,
Second.
October 2nd, January 7th, July 17th.
Does anybody have any
Second.
corrections or additions to the minutes?
No amendments?
Nothing?
Second.
Okay. We have
Rocky
a
seconded.
motion and a second.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Doug Neely, Commissioner Scott Wilson, Commissioner Lori Arinello,
Aye.
and Chair Mike Mitchell.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Any communications?
Just real quick, we are planning on meeting on December 17th with your Renewal Commission again to give an update on the 2 houses that are owned by Urban Renewal that we're looking at. We're doing some due diligence on any necessary work and preparing them for whatever decision the Urban Renewal makes on what the disposition of those will be. And then also just to start thinking about, we've got the Stimson RFP out on the street. We don't expect anything until January, but we want to come back and have a discussion about should we start focusing on 12th or 10th or what, kind of give staff some guidance on what to do next or hold, but just to get you thinking about where do we go next. That's all I have.
Quick question.
Thank you. Yes.
Tony, could you find out, or if you already know, what the disposition is of that boathouse? Because I think it's still there.
It is.
And I know we've had some issues with it. Can we get the county to remove it?
The commission like us to get the county to remove?
Well, I think we should ask them. They weren't really supposed to be there to begin with, as I understand, but if they're not using it anymore, it should really go away because it's an attractive nuisance.
I might hold discussion on that, given we could be working on the lake and clearing vegetation. It could be of use to us later.
It's kind of in disrepair. Have you seen it lately?
I haven't seen
It
it.
kind of
in
looks
about
like a shack. I mean, it's getting very shack-like.
I moved to table that then?
I'm just saying, if they're not using it and we don't have any use for it, because if it's in disrepair, I don't want us to spend money to try to fix it up. Just an inquiry, what the status of it is. And that can be some later.
Anything else from any of the commissioners? What time do you want to start?
Well, just adjourn and we'll get there.
Okay,
7:05 at least.
we're adjourned.